So, Rhett, let's talk about anamorphics. I feel like this is something I was really into years and years ago, and I've only recently kind of found a new life, new passion for it. But I'd just be curious to see what you're kind of doing these days when it comes to anamorphic shooting, because I know you're doing a lot of Micro Four Thirds stuff, or are you doing full frame?
For anamorphic, I usually go back to Micro Four Thirds for sure, but I've been curious about the full frame anamorphic stuff for a while, but it's tough in a few ways. So, but yeah, I just try to see if I can convince someone to pay for a rental for me, and then alternatively, I wanted to shoot a music video anamorphic last year, just came out pretty recently, and I actually stole kind of basically your exact SLR Magic 2X anamorphic setup with the whole adapter and rangefinder and stuff. I literally just copied that and found a used version that was kind of cheap finally. So yeah, it's an interesting world out there for anamorphics these days for sure.
Is this stuff that you're doing for like personal reasons, or are clients actually asking for anamorphic?
And that's one thing I was curious about talking with you, was just like, how do you choose anamorphic or aspect ratios or things like that? For me, with this music video project in particular, it was 4 or 5 videos, one storyline, one space. And so my thought was just, let's try and think of any way to differentiate these different pieces as possible. So like some are anamorphic, some are spherical, one's in black and white, and is like a sitcom / Beatles performance from the 60s. Like they're very different. And so anamorphic just felt right for this like sort of housewarming party kind of video that we did. So that's how I chose anamorphic for that one. But I mean, long story short, I would just shoot everything anamorphic if I could, but it's not always the most practical thing to do.
Sure. Is this the adapter you're talking about, the 2X from SLR Magic? What's funny is
Yes.
I think they have my video, one of my videos on their website.
Yeah,
Which is
it's
always nice to see.
yeah, I coveted this thing forever and I could never find a good copy, and I bought one on eBay finally, and not my favorite experience shooting, I have to admit, ever.
Totally.
Also, the copy that I got is so radically different in terms of like character from yours.
Interesting.
There's no blue flare at all on mine, and the flare is incredibly minimalized. And I've used their actual anamorphic lenses, the SLR Magic Micro Four Thirds, like 35, 50, and 70 before. Yeah, that might be it.
Is it these ones?
Yeah, so I've used these, so I was expecting that kind of vibe, because I mean those lenses are just those anamorphic adapters built into their lenses, right? It's not a big secret.
Yeah.
But when I got this, I was very surprised how different the characteristics were. And I actually messaged like Tito with Anamorphic on a Budget, and he confirmed like, yeah, this is extremely different from characters from the one that I had. So it was interesting how different it was.
Yeah, I always found it such a pain just focusing these things, because you've got the near or normal distance on the adapter where you can set what the focusing, but then you're still focusing the taking lens, and then you can even put the diopter on in front. So finding the right combination for the focusing distance, it's almost, to me, it's just super impractical for anything beyond just for fun or for interesting for a creative passion project. Like I couldn't ever bring it out on a client shoot, because I would look like I didn't know what I was doing, because I'm constantly fiddling.
And yeah, that was, so I did actually, the package I picked up did have the rangefinder included. Did you ever use the rangefinder for that?
Gosh, I don't think so. I have it's a diopter. That's all I'm aware of. But what's the rangefinder portion?
It's basically a variable diopter with a focus thread on the front, and it essentially lets you set the lens and the anamorphic lens to infinity, and then you just have focus gears on the front, which is really nice. But it also does, yeah, I wonder if they even have it.
They don't have the greatest website.
Oh wait, there it is, rangefinder on the left. Yeah.
Do you think
So
that using that reduced the flaring and stuff, or is it you think it's a separate issue?
I don't think so because I tested it a little with and without it, and
Okay.
if anything, I've seen that thing adds more flare from other tests I've seen, but that definitely helps the focus a ton. But it also is a thing where you have to like screw it in and tighten it down, and it also cuts off your frame a little bit. So I could use a
Mm.
35 millimeter on Micro Four Thirds without it, but I kind of had to bump up to a 50 millimeter with it. So there's ups and downs, but yeah. So not my favorite setup. I definitely prefer a true anamorphic lens compared to an adapter, like in a big way these days for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny, I used that the 2X from SLR Magic, out of necessity because at the time no one was making anamorphic lenses. And these
Right.
days I feel like we have an abundance of all different shapes and sizes and full frame or micro four thirds and what's the squeeze. But this is the music video you were talking about, right? That you shot with you shot with this with the
Yes.
SLR Magic.
Yes. Except for all the shots I faked, which we can talk about too.
Oh, that's cool. I love, just, I don't know, trying new things, being creative is always what I enjoy most about the work. So even if it doesn't turn out perfect, it's still about that experience and learning the lessons for the next time.
Exactly. And like I don't even mind the flares either, but like you can see we're shooting a huge like 300 watt into this window, and those flares are pretty subtle for an anamorphic, and they're not blue at all, which I'm not
No, no.
obsessed with the blue vibe, but it was interesting how different it was from what I remember your footage looking like.
Interesting.
And then of
Yeah,
course a
gosh.
lot of
And
these shots are not real anamorphic, but yeah.
so I assume you shot this open gate.
Yeah, so this is GH6, all shot in the like 5.8K open gate mode. And then a lot of the wider shots are the GH5S with the Midicon Speedmaster Cine like 17 millimeter lens just for some kind of wide angle and just cropped in.
Yeah, that's the limitation I feel like is having the widest on micro four thirds with that adapter being a 35. So gosh,
Yeah.
like a 70 millimeter equivalent on full frame. Like there's no opportunity to get anything wide with that adapter, which is why I do really like some of the newer options out there. Cause I think Laowa makes like a 20 mil that I think is, native micro four thirds. So
Yeah.
we can probably go look at all those lenses because nowadays it's a way more options than what I ever had even just a few years ago when I was kind of really playing around with this stuff.
I enjoy it. And if it feels right, why not? And
Well,
Panasonic is so optimized for this type of shooting that I always felt like I should be taking advantage of it, right?
absolutely. Like it's funny. The biggest selling factor for me and the Lumix system, with the GH4 happened to be that it was 4K. One of the first affordable cameras that could shoot 4K and you could do all the cool stuff when it came to resolution. But then in the GH4, there was the anamorphic mode, which at the time I was also very interested in anamorphic shooting. And then same thing with the GH5. And then they've just kept it ever since, right? This ability
Mm-hmm.
to use these more interesting lenses from a better starting point. Because when I look at Sony or Canon or Nikon or any of the others, just not having that option to shoot open gate or with the full sensor feels so limiting. Like I would lose so much, even though I'm not actively doing it a lot. I mean, I am shooting open gate, but for other reasons that we can get into. But just the ability to use these kind of actually anamorphic lenses, because I've used the 1.3x anamorphics and they don't do enough.
Mm-hmm.
So you really need, but I think 2x is too much for me, even coming from, 4x3. I like something probably in between. And I feel like these Siru lenses kind of were the ones that I saw most popular that a lot of people were talking about just a few years ago.
Is there any one squeeze that is like your go-to, or like theoretically or in practice, or what?
I was just thinking about this. I think 1.6, I think 1.7 doesn't exist as far as I know. It's either 1.6 or 1.8 would be the sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know yet. I think 1.6 is probably, but I could be swayed either way. And it would really depend on the camera that I'm using, full frame or micro four thirds, and also the lens combination. What's worth it? I feel like these Siru lenses are priced, relatively, like, this feels about right, like $1,000. But some of the other ones where they're, $5,000 for a lens, I go, I'm not really going to use it that much. So it would come down to price to value, and then what mount or platform I was buying it for. Because I was actually looking at getting one of these, probably something on the wider end. I don't know. I feel like with anamorphics, I want wider focal lengths in general. Some of the anamorphics, like the 150s and stuff, or the 135s, like that seems way too much. But the nanomorphs, I think, are really cool too, just for their size. That's kind of the main benefit, I'd say, there. But even like 1.5, coming from 4x3, I don't think is enough of a squeeze.
Yeah, I mean, you could almost argue that you could use those, depending on what you're doing, in 4x3 or even close to 16:9 to get more frame rates and things like that. So
Yeah.
maybe there's an argument. I think that's the only argument for the 133 lenses to me, is like, you're on a budget, your camera doesn't do open gate, or you just want to use more frame rates, because you do definitely have some real frame rate restrictions on the Lumix cameras and open gate, even if it is possible. The GH6 has a crop, over 30 frames, and you can do a 4x3 kind of anamorphic mode on the full frame cameras, but that's also in APS-C. So there's really no good high frame rate options for anamorphic, as good as it is, if we're going to nitpick, right?
Yeah, true. And if you were limited to like a 1.33, I feel like that's the point where you do just fake it, just crop the black bars on and call it a day. Because coming from using, way back when, the LA 7200, that old Panasonic lens adapter that was meant to stretch 4x3 to 16:9, and using that on 16:9 to get kind of anamorphic, it was never enough for me. It was never like, I never got those anamorphic characteristics in a way that I thought was good. And the downside was I took so many disadvantages with resolution and sharpness and focusing and all these things, going, I would have been better off just putting black bars on it instead of trying to get the anamorphic look without having a lens that would actually do it enough to my liking.
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest thing with me these days with anamorphics is just like justifying it in some way, because especially with this new music video, I was like, in the age of vertical video and social media crops and all this stuff, like, is it even like, I don't want to say the word like ethical, but is it I'll say it just because lack of a better word, right? Is it like right to even go with anamorphic if you know that on some level these social media crops are going to need to happen anyway? Because, man, cutting a 16, like a 9x16 out of a 2.39 to 1 is probably not the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah, and that's why I feel like and even like the culture around filmmaking and YouTubers and all that, I feel like anamorphic has kind of fallen out of favor, which is ironic considering we now have cameras that can do it properly, like these Lumix cameras that really embraced open gate. And we've got companies making all these cool anamorphics that probably 5 or 10 years ago I would have been drooling over. But now the landscape of content has changed so much with social media and needing all those different crops. So that's what I do, is I shoot open gate, but I don't use an anamorphic lens, and I get that open gate benefit, which if you get it, you kind of get it. And everyone, if you're in the know, you understand why that's so powerful to have your 16:9, but have extra vertical resolution for your 9x16 vertical videos. So I think I even mentioned this to you. It's kind of ironic or interesting that the format, the sensor format, the recording format of 4x3 or open gate was meant for anamorphic ultra wide footage, but has now become far more useful to me professionally for vertical video. So it's almost kind of like backwards, or just like the industry is not quite in step with the products that are being created for the problems they solve and the services they provide. These lenses would have been incredible 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but I almost want to say it's like a little bit too late for me when I do know that 9 times out of 10 or even 10 times out of 10, I'm going to have to make a vertical version, and I don't want to have to do that from Anamorphic.
Yeah, so that with the music video is the one that we looked at, and another one I did recently. I kind of just figured, if we're doing a music video, the point is to make the best video possible. And any derivative social media stuff we can come up with after the fact is kind of secondary. So with that, it made sense. But if the main point of something is going to be social media, it's pretty hard to justify like an true anamorphic look for a lot of things these days, I'm sure.
These Vasin lenses you were saying, is this what you used more recently and you like this a little bit better?
Yes, I rented the Vasin 28 and 65 millimeter. I skipped the 40 for a few reasons. Partially budget, but also the 40 has a lot of weird stuff like, no filter thread on the front, which I don't know why. I think it's supposed to be for matte boxes maybe, but still couldn't be that hard to put a filter on. This is a weird set, by the way. The 28 is radically different than those other two lenses. It might even be smaller than it's appearing in that picture compared to those two. Yeah, you can kind of see it there. It is tiny compared to the other two, which I like. I wish the whole set was that size. It's almost feels like the nanomorphs. But I can't deny the 60 has the 65 has a pretty amazing like close up ability. Just like everything about the 65 I loved, and it's a little faster too. So with this music video, it was really 28 millimeter on the gimbal on the GH5S and the 65 on the GH6 on tripod, or a few times handheld. And that was my experience. But 1.8 is, I think, even slightly better than 2x for like the final. It's a lot closer to the final typical resolution you're gonna end up with. And yeah, I had a great experience with those lenses. The 65 is so heavy, though. It is insane. Like, it's probably the heaviest lens I've ever used, for sure.
No, that's good to hear. I feel like these have kind of been off my radar a little bit just because they are that step up in price point. And I've been curious to know, is it worth it? I think, who'd you rent them from? Was it like Lens Rentals?
Yeah, I almost rented them locally in Chicago, but then Lens Rentals was cheaper. So I was like, well,
Yeah.
even with shipping, it's cheaper. So yeah, I think they were fantastic. But as I might have mentioned before, this company actually is shutting down production. So whatever stocks are left on shelves and whatever's on the used market is pretty much, that's it. So I'm not sure if we want to go into like why this company might have failed with all these other great options out there, but I do think at the end of the day they produced fantastic images, and I think they did a good job with what they did. I think they have a few other sets too for full frame, but I don't know.
Yeah, I would say I think I saw these guys at NAB years ago now. And at the time, certainly something that was out of my price range at that point in time where I was like, I can't afford, I can't justify that. But I thought it was really cool. What's the whole, I don't know, is there drama behind the scenes or why they just didn't sell enough of them, you think?
They had a very like kind of boilerplate kind of response. Thank you for the support, all this stuff. I don't remember exactly what they said, but I don't know. I think personally, I can identify a few things that might have held them back from really excelling. This original Micro Four Thirds set one started out just on Micro Four Thirds and eventually came out with some of them for the RF mount, which probably helped. But I think Micro Four Thirds being a little bit more niche of a platform, I think the radical difference in size and weight and form factor prevented them from being like the most professional kind of like on-set experience, because you can't really swap out the 28 with the other two super well. Some of them have different marking. The colors are a little bit different. Like, they're just a little too inconsistent to justify the higher professional price. Some of the measurements are measured in like feet 0.7, so it's like 5 feet 0.7, and it's like, why isn't it feet and inches? But I think I don't know. There's just a weird inconsistencies, that I think held them back. But I think it, like I said, yeah, this is, I think this one had the point. You can see 3.8 at the other end, I think, on the right side. So interesting choices were made for sure. But like I said, the
Yeah.
images are great at the end of the day. So if you can rent them or find a really good used price, I don't know if the price will go up or down now that they're out of business, but I guess we'll see.
Well, if it's the Micro Four Thirds ones, I could see coming down a little bit just because I feel like that even that style mount is falling out of favor pretty quickly as even Lumix goes full frame, and it just seems to be the inevitable pull, the gravity of it. For as much as people will drag their feet and complain and say the benefits of Micro Four Thirds, like I agree, but there's certain things the industry just goes the way it goes, and that kind of pop culture, the whatever kind of dominates, like look at Sony. I feel like that's just the way it's going to go. So maybe the Micro Four Thirds ones, maybe they'll, people won't have as much of a use for them and they will come down a little bit. I will say these are kind of ugly lenses on the outside. I don't think they don't scream, I don't know, a premium to me visually with the markings and everything, but it's good to hear that the optics are good, because that definitely encourages me to maybe try them out with a rental at some point in the future.
Yeah, and especially if you like the wide, I think you'll love the 28 millimeter. Again, if they made a whole set of the form factor of the 28 millimeter, it really seems like Laowa might have just seen that lens and been like, oh yeah, we can do that.
This Laowa 20 is one I've had my eye on, but it is only a 1.5x, but it's tiny and it's meant for a Micro Four Thirds. And I just think that 20 is probably one of the wider focal lengths for Micro Four Thirds that I've seen when it comes to anamorphics.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I guess all these discussions for you or anybody considering anamorphic kind of boil down to like, what's the appeal of anamorphic to you? Is it the bokeh or the flares or just like the distortion and the overall more subtle characteristics? Like what about anamorphic, I guess, speaks to you in particular?
I want to say it's the overall aesthetics, like all of the above, probably just the combination of them. I don't like sacrificing image quality though for it. And that's the problem I've run into in the past with some of the old adapters and things that we've talked about. Whereas now I'm hoping that with these new lenses, they actually can stand up to the optical performance that I expect, because there's so many good lenses now, spherical lenses, and anamorphic is always going to have a slight trade-off. I feel like it's never going to be as good as spherical, but I would want it to be close. I'd want it to be sharp. I want someone watching it to not be distracted by, well, how come that's out of focus? How come it looks so distorted? How come, but I do like the flaring. I like the bokeh, and I like the way that you get the horizontal field of view is separate from the vertical field of view. I think that's very satisfying visually to look at, but it would be something that I would use only for, personal creative type works, or where I really had the intention of this is meant to be cinematic, meaning you're going to watch it in a widescreen format, versus anything that was, like for social media.
Yeah, it's tricky with anamorphics because like, if you follow the anamorphic people, you'll get people that, complain about things being too sharp or things having not enough distortion and things like that. So I think it's a personal basis on like what characteristics of a classic anamorphic you like versus don't like for sure. I'm in the same boat as you though. Like the whole aesthetic, like I don't need the most neon blue intrusive flares ever to like appreciate anamorphic. Although I don't mind those either. Let's be fair. But yeah, it is the overall experience while maintaining like a level of sharpness. Like I definitely noticed that the Vasin's probably 2.8 would be a little bit better than wide open versus like 2.2 on the 28 versus 2 on the 65. But as people who both use the SLR Magic, that was like a F8 to get decent, not even decent, barely decent image quality. So I find it hard to complain that I need to stop down to 2.8 to get decent image quality. That's perfectly fine by me.
Yeah, I at this point for me, anamorphic would be more for just for fun, just to experiment, just to be creative. versus anything I could meaningfully invest in. And that is also kind of the breaking point for me, is that if I'm going to buy these lenses, or I mean, renting is certainly the better option, probably just to scratch that itch. But I do wonder, with Lumix having the full frame camera systems now with the S5 Mark II, and then, I mean, they've had it for a while with things like the S1, S1H, et cetera. But I'm also at that tipping point between, do I want to keep buying micro four thirds glass, or do I want to hold off a little bit, see how things shake out? Because I do like the L mount. I like what they're doing with their full frame offerings, basically keeping all those features that used to be exclusive to micro four thirds because it was easier because the sensor was smaller. It seems like the technology has finally caught up where the full frame limitations for video aren't as dramatic as they used to be. So to truly compete, I feel like in the pop culture zeitgeist of who's the most popular, and right now it's Sony, because they're full frame mirrorless and they have been for so long. That's such an attractive selling point. So it's nice that Lumix has headed that route and they've kind of figured out, okay, we gotta have something here to compete. But I'm just wondering, do I keep buying micro four thirds lenses, or am I going to have to invest substantially in full frame glass for L mount? I don't see myself going E mount, but I could if Sony changed their philosophy, but that's unlikely in terms of just having more of the video features built into their hybrid cameras versus saying, no, we don't do shutter angle, we don't do open gate. That's for the more expensive stuff. I just find that philosophy a little backwards. And I appreciate what Panasonic is doing with their Lumix cameras.
Yeah, I never want to be limited artificially much by the company that is selling me cameras, you know. And while there are still limitations with Lumix, especially with, you know, we can nitpick the open gate and say, you know, oh, there's no high frame rate option, there's no this, whatever. But it's still better than almost anybody else. I think Fuji is like the only other one that has open gate right now. And Panasonic's been doing this for years. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know the GH4 had like an anamorphic mode. I don't know about the GH1, 2, and 3, but
I think the
it's
GH4 is when they introduced it,
okay.
from
Yeah,
my memory.
but it's crazy. That's how far ahead they were. Like they had anamorphic whenever the GH4 came out. What was that, like 2004? I don't know, but like most people still don't have it.
2014, I want to say. Yeah, and that's what's crazy. And they've had shutter angle for the longest time. And again, it's just the timing of how things work out. They introduced anamorphic when we didn't have meaningful anamorphic lenses to use. And so it was kind of like, okay, this is kind of a novelty feature. I can use things like the SLR Magic or the LA 7200 or I don't know if there's any other random anamorphic glass at that time, but it was very few and far between. So there wasn't a good purpose to it. And then now we have all the lenses that are great for anamorphic, but there's still camera companies not embracing the ability to shoot open gate or anything other than 16:9. And the social media landscape doesn't really demand anamorphic. They wouldn't know what to do with it. So it's just how things play out is always funny. All the technology that's either too early, too soon, or too late.
Yeah, I mean, I did a video on my channel talking just about this very topic specifically with Panasonic of just like it feels like they've come up with, invented, or popularized every like piece of technology that is um, pretty much commonplace in most cameras these days. And they, you know, like dual gain sensors and fans and like all these different things that are expected. You know, you can't even like, I think almost every camera has a dual gain sensor in it, even if they don't market it these days. And Panasonic put that in the VariCam years ago and never, or IBIS obviously is like probably the biggest one. They didn't invent it,
Huge.
but
IBIS,
they
yeah.
definitely popularized it for video, especially. So,
And I think pretty much nearly perfected it, even compared to Sony. I still pick up those Sony cameras every once in a while, and I'll be like, this is, I can see that I'm not as stable as I am with the Lumix, just because it's got that better IBIS system.
yeah, it's very interesting how little credit they get for that stuff and how little it seems to have benefited them in the long run. Maybe just because of
Which
the phase detect, but
it shocks me how many features they've packed in and yet how small their market share is. Like in my mind, Lumix is super popular because the people I follow, the people I see, they're shooting with the GH5, maybe less so the GH6, but like the GH5 is a very, very, very popular camera. But in the giant landscape that is, people buying and selling cameras, Lumix is a blip as far as market share goes. And I think it really is those two things. They didn't have full frame for the longest time, and they didn't have good autofocus for the longest time. And those two things, you could, I could scream till I'm blue in the face about shutter angle and open gate and resolution and all this stuff. And people say, but is it full frame? But does it autofocus? And those two things, Sony just knew. I don't know if they knew, but that it worked out for them in hindsight that they went mirrorless. They got full frame in there, and they just nailed autofocus so well.
I think that's just a symptom of like the YouTube dominated sort of education going on in the filmmaking world, where people who are testing things in a lab or filming themselves testing things in a lab, they have very specific requirements that are important to them that many professionals couldn't care less about. And so I think that's dominated the discussion in a lot of ways when it comes to the perfect autofocus, the perfect image quality, and things that don't necessarily matter that much in a lot of professional settings.
Yeah, that's a good point. When you look at things through the content creator, YouTuber lens, they're having to film themselves. So autofocus is probably the most important thing to them. And for me, doing client work, it's like, I can pull focus. It's not that big of a deal. But as a YouTuber, you need it. And if you're mirroring that back to the audience, that's what they're focusing on as well. And then it's that perpetual never ending cycle, more people creating content in that same style, the same way, using autofocus, relying on it because they're only themselves filming. And now you create this, I don't know, the need for it, where before it was kind of a luxury, not necessarily a need. And definitely see myself in that same kind of boat where, yeah, I have the Lumix G9 Mark II. It does great autofocus, but it's also like the benefits I'm getting from it for client work are smaller, significantly smaller than they are when I'm trying to film myself for a YouTube video. And I go, oh, thank goodness I have good autofocus now, because now I can finally film myself. Where on like a client shoot, if I'm filming somebody else, it's not an issue. I can focus on them. It's not hard.
Yeah, and I hearing you talk the other day, like on one of your other shows, was like, the back button single autofocus, and then it's in manual focus, and you're good to go. Like that's a practical way to use. Man, I had a whole video planned on how to be a master of contrast-based autofocus, but seems a little too late to for that idea at this point. But it was workable for years. But once you get phase detect for especially this type of stuff, it's hard to go back for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, that back button autofocus. I don't know how you describe that to somebody, but just pushing autofocus, engaging it with a native lens. Because for the longest time, Lumix didn't have good autofocus, so I was adapting glass. It was old vintage stuff, or I was using speed boosters and all these things. Once I started using native lenses and invested in some really good micro four thirds glass, I started seeing that, oh, I can use autofocus, even though it's not good continuous autofocus. You'll get the pulsing if you try and do continuous on like a GH6, for example. You can activate autofocus to set your focus, then turn it off. And that's like, it's so seamless. It's as easy as taking a photo. And I never had issues for using the GH6 for, shooting other people. It's very easy to operate that way. Filming yourself, a little bit more challenging. Even this setup that I have here is a GH5 Mark II. And I've got to log into the Lumix app. I've got to connect it to the thing just so that it can focus on me. Because if I trust the autofocus, it's going to drive someone nuts. It's going to be pulsing. It's going to be doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So there's definitely advantages when you're filming yourself to have good autofocus, continuous, but there's so much you can do just with, even some older cameras, even the GH5. The GH5 for me is a great camera when it comes to open gate, because the 4K anamorphic between 24, 30, and 60, there's no crop difference. They're all the same. So you can shoot slow motion anamorphic open gate. You can shoot 4K 24 open gate, and you're not, that's my biggest gripe with the GH6 is that crop for anamorphic 60 is so severe and it's just harder to match because your resolution's different, your field of view is different. And that's why,
And the
even
noise
in my
is
mind, the
enhanced
GH5.
too.
Yeah, that's why in my mind, the GH5 is still such a powerful camera that maybe people don't really realize those benefits, but there's certain productions. And even there's times, this is a little bit maybe more of a niche thing, but the GH6, every codec is 10-bit. And that's great if you're color grading. But if you want playback performance and editing, especially if you're doing any kind of cloud-based workflow, sometimes you might want 8-bit. And you can't do that on the GH6. You can't shoot an 8-bit. But on the GH5, almost every mode is 8-bit.
Technically, you can switch to MP4 and like half the resolutions in MP4 are still 8-bit. So you can dig down and find
Oh,
some.
okay. I wonder if I'd have to play around then. Anytime I get a Lumix camera, I just go through the menu and I go MOV,
Yeah.
constant preview on. Like I have my settings that I just do every time whenever I get a new Lumix camera. But that's a good point. I hadn't even considered switching to MP4 to get 8-bit versions of
And
some of
they've
those
got lower
resolutions.
bit rates too. So I do a lot of weddings for companies I've got to upload for. And I'm like, oh, time
Yeah,
to switch to the 72 bits per second 4K mode because I don't want to use like the 150 plus ones.
that is a next level pro tip. The switch to MP4 to optimize your files for cloud workflows. It's smart.
And it also gets rid of the 4 audio channels. There's only one audio channel on MP4 as well. So people always
How
complain that there's the 2 empty files, but just switch to MP4.
Gosh, that is a good point as well. I heard, yeah, you were on your Micro Four Third talks. You guys were talking about that and having like those channels 3 and 4 as like a safety track. I've never understood, and I've tried to explain it. I've gone on the Lumix live streams and said, here's what you guys should do, because if you plug in something to the 3.5 millimeter jack, channels 3 and 4 are just gone. The internal mic is just gone. All you have is the whatever coming into the 3.5. And I'm sitting there going, guys, you have channels 3 and 4. Why do I have to buy the XLR adapter to use them? And I have the XLR adapter, so it's not like I'm, complaining about the price or the needing to use the hardware. It's just the stupid limitation of you're giving me 4 audio tracks and you're wasting 2 of them almost all the time.
Yeah, there's a lot of different setups they could do for sure. But yeah, safety track and just like rerouting the internal mics to that just in case you don't turn on your mic or it got unplugged a little bit. Like it could save a lot of shoots. So maybe that's something they can improve on in the future for sure.
I dropped that in their live chat one time and it was like, what? I don't understand. Some of these things, the technical things are very hard to describe. Like you were saying, like open gate, it's hard to explain that to somebody unless they really truly know what you're talking about. And I feel like that's the same thing where I'm trying to explain, use the internal mic, and they're like scratching their head going, what are you talking about?
Yeah, communication's like half the job doing this sort of stuff. So I think it's not always everybody's strong suit. Not even my strong suit all the time, but
Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts on anamorphics? I don't know if we covered everything.
I guess I am curious about the open gate stuff. I know you don't like vertical video, and you have your thoughts on all that. But how often do you end up actually shooting open gate for clients? How often do they ask for it? Do you pitch it? Like,
All the time. All the time. Show I work on is intentionally a multi-platform show. So it's an Instagram show, TikTok show, YouTube show, OTT. Like it's all of the above. And we're able to do that because of Open Gate. And it's one of the biggest battles I've had to fight is we should shoot this way because of all the delivery platforms, because it's syndicated across everything. Because a lot of people will have that mindset of I'm making a TikTok, I should shoot it vertical. So I'll shoot on my phone or I'll build my camera rig sideways. And then I scream because you're intentionally cutting off any opportunity you had for a traditional YouTube video or anything on a television if you want to syndicate through Roku or through any of those streaming platforms. You're locking yourself into social video. And then vice versa, if you're shooting 16 by 9, you're shooting because you're on a Sony camera or Canon or Nikon or any of these cameras that just does 16 by 9 because that's 4K or that's HD or that's 8K. Understanding that you're only getting that small little slice of the center for vertical and not having the additional resolution on the top and the bottom is so limiting when someone comes to you and asks, hey, can we make a TikTok? Hey, can we make an Instagram reel? Hey, can we make a YouTube short? I think I saw that there's 35 million TikToks uploaded every single day. It's absurd, the amount of content that's just spewing across the internet, but it's the trends, it's the social cycles, it's what clients want, it's what viewers want. In a lot of cases, they want to just consume a short. So having that flexibility and versatility with OpenGate, having 16 by 9, not losing anything. That's what I always have to stress with anyone I'm talking to. It's like you're not sacrificing anything. When you record 16 by 9 on a Sony camera, you're pre-cropping the footage. You're throwing it away to begin with. OpenGate just allows you to get back the full sensor. So you're not losing anything, you're only gaining. And for me, the file sizes are a little bit bigger, but that flexibility is far greater. I work with someone who she's like a gardening YouTuber, and she makes traditional long form YouTube videos, but she also needs shorts because that's what the algorithm demands. And so I'll shoot all of that OpenGate so that I can easily cut. It's a I don't know, a secret weapon or something in post-production. I didn't lose anything. I got my 16 by 9. The video is the video. Nothing changed. My framing, everything's the exact same as it would have been. But now when I'm asked to make a vertical video, it's easy. And I can actually, in a lot of cases, export, basically all my settings are done at export. So I'll edit on an OpenGate timeline. So my timeline itself is 4:3, and any crops will happen on export versus making a sequence that's, a certain size, because then you have to make another sequence that's the other size. And I don't like that duplicative, redundant work. I'd rather just say, here's the content. This is the story. This is the video. It doesn't matter how you crop it. All that can be done later.
Interesting. Yeah, I do tend to go the like duplication route, where but again, this is stuff that's mostly 16 by 9. I'll edit a 16 by 9, copy paste the sequence, trend, and then I'll just do the Premiere auto frame and see how it does with the vertical side. But do you frame your shots any differently because of the aspect ratio? Do you try to do like center framing more and stuff like that, or what?
Yes, pretty much, but I have the luxury. So there are limitations, right? You can't have your rule of thirds, your more cinematic styles, but I find that a lot of the content I'm producing is someone talking to a camera. And when someone's talking to the camera, it makes sense to have them centered. I think you could offset them on a third if you want, but when everything's straight, I find that center symmetry very nice. So it's a luxury. It's a benefit of when someone's talking to a camera. Oh, I can shoot this OpenGate. That center is never going to be lost. I'll only ever lose my corners, and those wouldn't have been recorded anyway if I was shooting 16 by 9. So I'm only gaining vertical resolution on that center third.
Interesting. Yeah. I definitely tend to get the center frame. I don't know if I think about it that much. Do you use the overlays at all? Like, do you use a 9:16 overlay just to make sure it's? I feel like I use 9:16 more often than 16 by 9 because it's easier for me to imagine. Since you can't do two overlays at once, I don't think.
No, I don't think you can do two overlays at once. But so what I do when I'm filming OpenGate is I'll do a 16 by 9. So my horizontal framing, and I'll kind of mat out the opacity on the top and the bottom, so I can still see it, but it's not prominent. So I can know it's there, what's up vertical. And then the guidelines, the 3:3 grid, that center third is actually pretty close to 9:16 when you shoot that way. And so that's kind of my safety. That's my double frame. I'm using the 3:3 grid along with the, what do they call it? The frame outline.
Yeah.
I forget what the
Frame
term is in
guides
the
or whatever.
Lumix menu. Yeah, but I made a
Yeah.
video of how I do it, which is, again, it's maybe super unique to my setup and the content I'm creating, but hopefully it helps at least one other person out there. Because once you understand like the power of doing it that way, all the nightmare of post-production and just the tedious work of reframing it just to make a TikTok, because it's like it never feels worth it. It never feels worth it to spend that much time making something that's essentially just a copy paste shortened version of something else.
Yeah, yeah. And it's definitely easier than, like, I know a guy I worked for a while, and he was like, we just take the Black Magic Pocket 6K or the R6 and shoot 8K and shoot really, really wide and hope it works out. And I'm just like, oh, that just hurts. So
Well, I want to say
I
on those
can't
Black
imagine.
Magics, they do have anamorphic modes, but they're not open gate, because I think on the Black Magics, at least the ones I've been looking, I think on the Ursa Mini, they have some different aspect ratios. You can shoot 4:3, but I think it is cropped a little bit. I don't remember
Mm-hmm.
exactly. So it's funny for the amount of power that all these cameras have. It's the Lumix ones that happen to be the cheapest in a lot of cases, but have some of the most powerful features that really unlock workflows, because that's how I like to look at it. It's not a spec to me. It's how does this integrate into my workflow, and what does it change? If I have autofocus, what does that mean for my production pipeline? If I have open gate, if I have shutter angle, if I have 10-bit 422, like we were talking about the difference between 10-bit and 8-bit, there's sometimes where you intentionally want the smaller file size and the easier to edit codec because of whatever it is you're doing. So it's not just, oh, is it better for being better sake because it's a bigger number? Oh, 8K, oh, that must be the best. But how does that change my workflow? And am I actually gaining, or am I sacrificing all the speed and efficiency I had before just to have a bigger resolution, but now it's a nightmare? That was my biggest gripe with Canon files in the C,
Mm-hmm.
300, 500 days. They had this like really strange MXF architecture, and importing and editing those files never seemed to play nice with our editing setup. So anytime someone rented one or we used one on a project, it was, 10 times the amount of hair pulling, which is already part of the process. When clients have revisions or there's you're always going to be problem solving to some degree. So I don't want to add more problems to myself just to have, oh, it's raw. Oh, it's good autofocus. Yeah, but like I just sacrificed everything over here. Whack-a-mole a little bit.
Yeah, and to go back slightly with what you're saying, like, I just think the versatility of the codecs and bit rates and all the things that Panasonic offers is really appealing to me, because bit rates and resolutions keep going up, and I've used a few cameras that don't have lower bit rate options, and so I'm like, oh well, I like that the GH6 can record 24 megabits 1080p if you want to. You can record 22 hours on a 256 gigabyte card, or you can switch up to ProRes internal and get about 12 minutes instead. So the huge range of codecs and formats and everything, and then you can do RAW as well, and with certain plugins and recorders and things. So the fact that all that stuff can come from one device is pretty impressive, because I don't know how many other cameras have those huge ranges available, because you never know what you're going to run into doing this freelance. Especially for me, I'm just like, I never get the same requirements twice, I feel like. So knowing that most of those
True.
things should be covered is nice.
Do you use the My Recording menu
I
for like your
really should
favorite
more.
codecs?
I really
So that's
should.
one thing I started doing on the GH6, because you get that list of codecs, and yeah, you can filter it, but it's a little tedious. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
handful that I always use, right? So my two that I shoot open gate, and then my two 24 and 60 that are kind of 4K 422 10-bit, that middle of the range where it's good enough for most purposes. It's not maxing it out with ProRes or anything like that. And I started using that My Recording menu just because I was sick of scrolling through a list of 30 codecs. But it is nice that they're all there, because it is so powerful to have those options, which I feel like is all we really want. Because for as much as people say, the right tool for the job, every project's different. A lot of cameras lock you into, well, you have to kind of do it this one way. And I do appreciate that. And now that you mention it, in a way that I hadn't quite considered before, just the open opportunity and options of do what you want. You can make it work. Yeah, shoot 1080 and with a low bit rate if you need to, because it's really like a long convention or conference or something where it's just, hours upon hours and hours of footage that you would need to capture. That doesn't need to be 4K ProRes in a lot of cases. It just needs to capture that it happened.
Exactly. So I'm glad. I remember thinking way back in the day, I'm like, is the GH6 too good of a camera for me? You know, I was like, I hope it can do bad enough quality to maintain some of these super long form things that I do, or you know, getting a quick 1080p file to like just upload and send away and not think about it too much. So I actually had to look up to see if the specs were low enough for me to buy it, which was a weird situation. But you know, it is what it is.
Have you run in? I think the only issue that anyone ever mentioned about the GH6 is the streaking issue. Have you noticed that at all?
So I was talking with Matthew Dangu on his channel about this recently, and off the top of my head, I thought of what I thought was the best way to put it, which was I think the fear of the streaking happening psychologically is worse than any outcome it could have on your footage. If you're aware of it and that it's a possibility and it could ruin a shot, you're going to be like panicking looking for it all the time, I feel like. And I feel like that's what a lot of people do. And I've had it show up about a dozen times, maybe, and maybe only about 6 times that I couldn't change a setting, or, you know, like literally just like bump one stop up on the ISO or switch to DR boost. So I've really dived deep into the whole streaking issue. I think I probably have like 2 or 3 videos on it at this point. And my basic conclusion was just like, it's very easy to avoid if you know the certain ISOs that it's really bad at, which is mostly around 2000 ISO DR boost off, or like at 12,800 ISO. But if you're at
Oh,
250, or yeah, like it's the worst at 12, like the highest possible ISO. So,
okay.
and it's mostly
That's
just in
probably why
vlog
I've never
too.
run into it. I don't think I've ever shot anything. I've certainly not shot anything above 2000. And even that is, even with dynamic range boost for me, is too noisy. So I'm always shooting at like 250, 500, 800 on the GH6.
Mm-hmm. And like, I know people complain that DR boost on is really high, but no one gives them credit for dropping the low ISO down to 250 from 400. So just a little credit where credit's due, you know, because GH5 vlog was 400. So it's better there.
True. Which I didn't even shoot a lot of vlog on the GH5 because it was the vlog L, and even like a
Mm.
lot of the codecs, 60 wasn't 422, wasn't 10-bit. So the GH6, once all the codecs operated in a way and we got proper vlog, I feel like that's when it really clicked for me, where I said, okay, I can shoot everything 10-bit 422. I can have the color information I need that'll justify me shooting it in vlog. And it was the dynamic range boost was the only thing that really was a non selling point for me, because by the time I finally started using it and realized I was in vlog, I was limited to ISO 2000 and looking at that footage going, that's too grainy, it's too noisy for me. I just never used it. But I'm also not the person that's sitting there pixel peeping dynamic range and saying I don't have enough. Almost everything I shoot, I'm able to control the lighting in such a way, or just film intentionally to where it's not a problem.
Yeah, it's a strange situation. I tend to use it as much as I can for certain things, and then sometimes I just am like, I don't care. But being able to use a lot less powerful lights and doing a slight exposure to the right. I don't really believe in exposed to the right that much. Hot take here. I never really do it, especially on 2 stops like some people say. But the GH5S and the GH6 is a nice pair. I like shooting with them because, like, on the low end, you've got 250 and 400, GH6 and GH5S respectively. And then if you go to the DR boost or the high gain, you've got 2000 on the GH6 and 2500 on the GH5S. So they're just close enough that if they're in a bright situation, I can knock them down, and if it's getting a little bit dimmer, I can bump it up and turn the DR boost on and the high ISO on and get similar ISO ranges. And then if you bring in the full frame camera, it's like 640 and 4000, which is just, you know, I'm like, okay, now I got to actually think hard about this. But yeah, I tend
Are you
to like the
shooting?
DR boost.
Are you shooting everything vlog?
Whenever I can, whenever it makes sense, for sure. But a lot of the weddings I do, I have to ship the footage off, and someone else handles it. A lot of associate shooting, so in those situations, it's definitely like a modified natural profile. But if
Natural,
I could
that's your
shoot everything
go-to.
in vlog, I think it's yeah.
What is it about natural that pulled you to that versus some of the others?
I have a lingering resentment for like Cine D because with mixed lighting, it looks so strange. Like if I ever wanted my like orange like fixed lights in like wedding venues to be like a sickly green, like that would be my go-to color profile. And also, have you noticed how weird the Cine D is on the GH5 Mark II? It is so bizarre. Like I think it's actually
I
broken.
I don't touch Cinelike D ever since, gosh, I think it was back in the GH5 days because everyone was saying Cinelike D, the most dynamic range before they came out with the Vlog L, paid upgrade and everything. Just base camera, GH5 when it came out, Cinelike D. And I thought, man, this sure looks real awful. And people were doing all sorts of strange things, turning the contrast way down, highlights down, like trying to maximize the dynamic range. And all I ever thought it did was just broke the footage. So I used Cinelike V for the longest time on the GH5, but I actually don't like Cinelike V on the GH5 Mark II because it's Cinelike V2, and I think they even made Cinelike D2. And
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not shooting vlog, I am going with something. My two are either standard or natural, depending on if I want a little lower contrast or a little higher contrast. And my mind these days favors a little bit more high contrast. If I'm shooting that way anyway, and I want to get closer to the final mark, I see so much footage that for the longest time, the style was basically like ungraded log footage. I don't know, like years ago, I was seeing commercials
Yep.
that were clearly shot log, hardly graded, if at all. And I'm sitting there going, looks gray and gross. And the trend now, I feel like the movies out there like Dune or Oppenheimer or even the new Mad Max movie that's coming out. And Mad Max was one of my favorite movies from a color perspective when that came out. What was it?
Mm-hmm.
Fury Road.
Yep.
Seeing those rich, vibrant colors, seeing contrast, not clipping highlights, not clipping your shadows, but just having the full range. We've got, 0 to 100. Like, let's use it all. Let's not have everything just squished in the middle. So I've been embracing that, trying to have deep, rich, dark blacks and, kind of bright highlights, but in a very pleasing, satisfying way. So I'm using that full range. So yeah, standard and natural have been my go-to if I'm shooting off vlog. Otherwise, I'll shoot vlog and then try and find a good. I'm working right now to kind of refine my color process for the G9 Mark II because vlog works a little different than on the GH6 for whatever reason. So
Yeah.
figuring out, okay, what's my kind of go-to for just good, satisfying, pleasing color right off the box.
Yeah, I tend to like, I guess, a lower contrast look by a little bit, which is why I think I go to like a modified natural profile for a lot of things. Standard always feels too punchy for me. And maybe I just don't have the confidence to nail my exposure doing like weddings and events. I'm just like, if
It's
your
certainly
exposure
tough.
is
Yeah.
off with like that crunchy of contrast, yeah, you could mess it up pretty easy. And I feel like a little more forgiveness and natural, I tend to prefer slightly. But
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I agree. Like, I think Fury Road really did kick off the really punchy look for a lot of these films. And I think it just, I don't know. I like that look a lot as well. And there's places for low contrast looks. There's places for low saturation looks, but it's very difficult to pull off both because then it just looks like you forgot to like turn a layer on when you exported the video. I hate. I just talked about this trend to somebody recently. I'm like, I can't stand that ungraded log look. It's one of my pet peeves for sure.
Well, and I think there's so much that's influenced, the content we consume ends up influencing the content we create, in that nowadays almost everyone's a content creator because everyone's uploading to Instagram or TikTok or wherever it might be. They're shooting with their phone. The color looks how it looks, it's whatever Apple or Samsung or whoever made the phone decides this is what looks good this year. So they'll make that, right? And you can play with filters and stuff, but even that I feel like it's fallen out of favor. The overly stylized retro look is kind of not really cool anymore. And then you have on the other side, you have YouTubers who I know, for as much as they might talk about, you know, dynamic range and log profiles and color gradings, they got to make content quickly. And so I know a lot of them, even you'll see like people praising like, your color looks so great. Your color looks so great. What are you doing? And they're using a standard profile, something that came with the camera, because these companies kind of know what looks good. And so they build it in. And if it's a quick turn, like, let's get it done, you know, they might run with that. And sure enough, straight out of the camera, the colors pop, they look great. And so that everyone's consuming that content, getting used to seeing those types of visuals. And then it almost is, if you're trying to do something maybe more intentional, taking more time, and you're ending up with a lesser result, it's again, I'm asking myself, like, why am I going through all these hoops? Why am I trying so hard and still like missing the mark when someone else is just shooting with the camera as it came and they're crushing it? And so just trying to find that balance. I always want control. I don't want to sacrifice something where I ruin my footage because I did something poorly, but at the same time, finding those efficiencies in the workflow, and getting closer to that end result sooner in the process. For some projects, definitely is where my mind is taking me these days. Where, yeah, 10 years ago, I might have thought it was cool to just spend all this time doing a lot of this stuff. But nowadays I'm just trying to keep on to the next project, onto the next project, onto the next project. And if I can get it right out the gate, to me, I think that's kind of a win.
You know, I don't know why Panasonic doesn't have like a V-Log to their other LUTs converter. Like, why isn't there a V-Log to natural, a V-Log to standard, a V-Log to Cine D? Because then you could shoot like the GH6 and V-Log and then just shoot with the GH5 that you didn't buy the code for and match them together. Or you could try V-Log, and if you messed it up too bad, you can just convert it right back. So personally, I'm a Varicam LUT guy. I use that free Varicam LUT pack for so much stuff. And I think though there's like 2 good LUTs in the whole pack, but they're still
That's what I was going to say. I don't think you can find that pack anymore. I was looking for it the other day and the link doesn't exist. So if you have them,
yeah,
that's good. But yeah, I've gone through all those LUTs and they're too much. They're too aggressive. There's like everything's blue or everything's yellow. And I'm going, what is the use case for this level of color grading in a LUT, when what I want is more variations on the Rec 709 conversion? Like you're saying, give me the ability to kind of convert to a 709 space. And yeah, it's got like a cool, you know, teal and orange kind of thing going on, or one's warm and one's cool, like, but not just all green. I don't need that.
Yeah, and for anybody listening who somehow has those LUTs still, I don't know why they got taken down. I know this is another topic, but the broadcast division and the regular Lumix division have been combined, I think, with Lumix now, which is interesting to see what that will mean. But I don't know, maybe that has something to do with why those LUTs got taken down. But if you need those LUTs, hit me up. But the nicest 709 and the fashion low contrast, and maybe the vintage one, but definitely those 2 are the only ones I use. And those really are like the standard and the natural profiles of the Varicam pack. Everything else is kind of trash. I guess diplomatically, I would say they're niche use cases.
Yeah, and my biggest problem with LUTs in general, because I assume coming from Panasonic, these would be, you know, best of the best, engineered for perfect color performance. Because I'm so skeptical of people's LUT packs online, where I go, did you just threw some colors together and you saved it as a cube file? Like, how can I trust that what you did is good? And I feel like coming from Panasonic, it should be, this is the best stuff. And out of all of it, I don't hardly use any of it other than the 709 conversion. And then I'll do my own color grading, because I haven't quite found the thing I can truly trust and rely on. Although I will give the nicest, yeah, and the fashion one another shot. I just played around with them the other day, actually, funny enough. and was kind of like, yeah, like it's good, but I want 20 flavors of that, 50 flavors of good. So that way I can pick and
Mhm.
choose depending on the project versus, hey, you've got these two, and if they don't work, well, you're kind of out of luck.
Yeah, and do definitely use them as a starting point. I'm like nicest and then LUT, and then maybe I'll slap on film convert if I thought the look of film convert out of the gate was too strong, and then I'll dig into my like random pack of like film riot LUTs that I've got and turn them down to like 20%. Like I'm just like, very often it's never the only thing that I'm applying, but yeah, I would play around with nicest and the fashion low contrast. I have a feeling you're a fashion low contrast type of guy. It's just the nicest profile, but punchier. But yeah, I think that basic Lumix conversion 709 could use an update too, because I don't know if that's been updated since like the GH5. I don't know if you've noticed, but the V-Log from the GH6 to the G9 II, even like one generation of cameras is pretty different. And going back to the GH5S and the GH5 is a whole different story as well.
Yeah, it's the you. I think they're probably looking at it like, hey, this works. This isn't broken, so like we don't have to fix it. But I would definitely appreciate some more styles, some more flavors, especially more optimized per camera. It's a little bit in the weeds and maybe a little confusing for some people, but I would appreciate that level of options. Speaking of all the options Panasonic usually gives us with their Lumix cameras, more on the color profiles, especially because now they've got this real-time LUT built right in, which is like, why not take advantage of that? Give us your kind of approved Panasonic engineered and optimized LUTs so we can use this in the same way that the Fuji cameras are, famous for their color science and all that they're baking in. And I feel like S-Log, they went S-Log 1, S-Log 2, S-Log 3. There's so many options for Sony in a quite almost opposite direction where it's almost a little confusing. S-Gamut, Cinetone, they have all these different terminologies and ways to
Yeah, I
approach it.
don't understand Sony at all. Like I'm like, hey, what profile are you shooting? They're like, oh, no profile. What does that mean? You're not shooting it. You're just raw dogging your. I don't know if that's a good term to use, but like I'm just like I don't know what no profile means. Like that doesn't make sense to me. You're shooting something. What's the base? Where are you starting from? I
Yeah.
don't know.
I, I hate the Sony cameras for all of the usability functionality. I'm actually making a video on it right now. Just the ergonomics, the menus, everything about it is so annoying. And not only is it annoying for me as the operator, but it's also annoying working with other people because you have those communication breakdowns of what did you do, and they don't really quite know, or they change settings that you're trying to untangle the mess that they made for themselves. Add one layer into post production, and someone asks, "Hey, how am I supposed to convert this? What did you shoot?" And depending on the camera, the person, it can really be hard to track that information down, and you're just playing the guessing game of, I think it looks kind of like S-Log 3, but maybe it's not. So I think there's some sweet spot in between where it's pretty clear and streamlined and bulletproof, but we still have the flexibility that we need, which is here's the way you can shoot in the camera. Because yeah, on the Sonys, they have, I forget what it is, but the picture profiles are separate from the color profiles. So you can be in like standard, but then like have it turn on a picture profile. And even that is a mess because it's
Yeah,
PP1, PP2, PP3. What do these things mean? People can change them. It's super frustrating actually. And it's one of those reasons why I'm not a fan of that system, because for as good as the autofocus is, there's too many I don't know, hurdles and roadblocks and other pitfalls that you can find yourself trapped in.
yeah, and circling back to Lumix and talking about Fuji, like they have this real time LUT going on now, but I don't think it comes with anything pre-installed. Maybe the normal conversion LUT, and I'm just like, why isn't nicest 709 in there? Why isn't a couple like black and white or film conversions in there? It feels like that could be a perfect version of what you're advocating for, but it's just like the startup cost of figuring out how to get those on the camera in the first place and then tweak them and make sure they look good is like, I think Matthew, who I mentioned earlier, mentioned like an intensity sliding bar on there too. So once you load the LUT in, you've got increments of 10% of strength, like little things like that. I know it's like a new technology, but these are I guess wish list items for the future.
I think it's always best. We can probably wrap it up here, but just
Yeah,
give, when you leave it up to the wild west of just internet creators to make their LUT packs, gosh, no, God knows there's millions of them at this point. You're really rolling the dice on, is this going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Who do you trust? How do you know who knows what they're talking about or not? I think from a company standpoint, their brand, they should make it pretty easy, just like the color profiles are built into the camera. I could actually use less of those. I don't like, that's one of my biggest problems now on the Lumix cameras. There's just so many color profiles to go through. And I think you can actually remove some from that list. So I should probably take the time to do that because there's some I'll never
definitely
use. I
would
think there's
recommend
like,
that for sure.
aren't there like 3 or 4 different monochrome ones
Hmm.
or something like that? Like it's just kind of like overkill for, that's more or less kind of the same thing. So give me the handful. Yeah, give me the black and white. Give me the standard or natural or portrait or landscape. But then, like, do I really need vivid? Do I really need, like, at this point, there's like 709, Cinelike D, Cinelike V, Hybrid Log Gamma, and Vlog, all in the kind of what's the real difference here? So if the path forward is these real-time LUTs, okay, then I need some from Panasonic that I know that they've at least vetted and they've said are good, because then that's a good starting point. And then if I really want to go off into the wild west of the internet or make my own, I can do that. But I need a good place to start. And right now, I just haven't done enough of that because it's too much of a, it's not a, I don't say it's the learning curve's too high. It just feels like I have to do a lot of work to get the ball rolling. And without having a good LUT pack to start with, what do I start with? Do I go find some random LUT pack and say, I hope this works out? Like, I think I'll just stick with what I've been doing.
Yeah, it feels like a great starting place, but maybe slightly like half baked. And hopefully that's something. I think there's something they're probably considering. Fingers crossed, but I guess we'll see.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Rhett. It's been great talking to you. And hopefully we can do this again sometime because I really enjoy these types of conversations, especially we're talking to another professional who's doing similar types of stuff, because it's kind of hard locally actually to find other people who are shooting Lumix or even have the level of insight. A lot of people just have a camera, and as long as it works, and they're not really fascinated by the ins and outs. But I really geek out about it and love it. So thank you for spending some time with me.
Yeah, I'll definitely be hitting you up next time I have something I want to rant about or go on about at nauseum, and I hope you do the same. So thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's my favorite thing.